Hey everybody, it's Shadowstar and Crystal, and this time we're starting a brand new show. It's time for The Flash, the first episode, the pilot, or for some reason as it's called sometimes online, City of Heroes.
I've never heard that name.
For some reason, when I look on certain lists, it's called City of Heroes, and sometimes it's just called Pilot. I don't know why, but either way, anyway, it's the first episode, so that's important.
The DVD doesn't call it City of Heroes.
Yeah, which was also the name of the first episode of Season 2 of Arrow.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that. But let's start off with, well, obviously, if you're watching this and you've been watching Arrow, first thing you'll notice is just this show is very different. I don't just mean because it's sci-fi, but just the tone. It's a lot, even though sure that it has its dark moments with Barry's backstory, the show itself is much more lighter and fun than what you'd see on Arrow.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe that's why I enjoy it better than Arrow.
Or even just what I know Flash becomes at some points in its future. But right now, it's just such a light-hearted comic book show. It just feels like, when you think of classic comic book TV shows or movies, this is what you think of. A light-hearted character, a light-hearted discovery of powers. It's just a fun show.
Superheroes try to appeal to anyone, but Arrow is not always all that kid-friendly.
Well, that's the thing, though. Arrow isn't a superhero show. It's a comic book show, but it's not a superhero show. This is a superhero show, and it just feels like it. It feels like, Barry, if I could compare him to a Marvel character, when I first saw this episode, it reminded me of when I've seen Spider-Man movies.
I sort of see what you mean.
He feels like especially the lighthearted character and those moments where he's discovering his powers.
Especially when, one of the, Spider-Man guys, has a bit of a baby face.
Well, a lot of the Spider-Man characters can look kinda like Barry-ish.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
I don't know which one I saw, but I've seen part of a Spider-Man movie, and he did have baby face.
I've seen a few different ones, but that's the thing. When I first watched his show, especially at that scene where, he's in the alleyway discovering his powers, it just reminded me of that for some reason. But the tone of this show is just so delightful and fun. Sure,
yeah, it's something people watch as a family.
I know, I love that. I mean, it sprinkles in some, obviously there's still dark or heavy moments, but it's such a fun show, especially, you could just see, the joy when, he's training for the first time, or the joy with characters like Cisco.
Cisco's the best.
We'll get to that, but anyway, getting off of that...
We already got to it, he's the best.
Alright, we haven't had much of Cisco, but we've seen him before, and we'll see plenty more of him, but Cisco didn't have much in this episode. He's a fun character, remember, it's an introduction episode, so...
And remember, this is the first thing Carlos Valdez did.
Yeah.
This is the start of his acting career, and it is amazing. He's just a natural-born actor.
Outside of a cameo on Arrow, this was the first thing Carlos has done, apparently, at least on TV. I think he's done stuff on stage, apparently. But either way, but yeah, like I said, this show is just so lighthearted and fun. But getting onto the episode itself, getting onto the show itself, we'll start with Barry's backstory, which, if you're familiar with the comics, it's a very well-known backstory. I mean, after everyone knows about Krypton, everyone knows about Batman's parents dying, and, this backstory with Barry's mother is also another well-known backstory.
Yeah. I mean, I know they had to use the same backstory as the comics, but seriously, superheroes and their tragic backstories. Do we ever get a superhero who doesn't have a tragic backstory?
I'm sure we do, but I'm not superly familiar with the comics, but there are different versions of Barry's backstory, but this is one of them. And we open with, I suppose that's the thing, we open the show with a few mysteries, and obviously the show doesn't want to keep everything a secret, because that's the thing, if you're even vaguely familiar with Flash comics, you're immediately going to recognize that yellow blur, which is fine, because it's going to get you excited. If you're a comic book fan, seeing what's in that yellow blur must have got people so excited.
Yeah, because he's such an iconic Flash villain.
Exactly. But we won't say too much about that. But, But but that's the thing, this show is just so fun, and unlike Arrow, I feel like Flash holds true to its comic book roots a lot more.
Yeah.
Arrow does this thing of inventing a lot of characters, or taking characters who weren't important, or making characters not be like their comic book selves, whereas Flash, especially himself, just feels so true to himself. Like, if you're familiar with the comics, look at Oliver Queen in the comics compared to the show. He's actually very lighthearted and fun character, whereas obviously he's not on Arrow, whereas Barry is. Barry feels a lot more close to his comic book self, at least from what I know. But
yeah, from what I've heard, Arrow did a lot of inventing. Like, I don't think Thea was really herself in the comics. She didn't even have that
But
name.
the thing is, I think back then, they weren't sure how close they wanted to go. They didn't want to go super comic booky because they weren't sure how they were going to go. They wanted to make it grounded to appeal to a wider base. But by this point, they've done 2 seasons of Arrow, and now they're realizing, yeah, we really want to do comic book stuff. So for Flash, it's a comic book show, and...
Yeah, because they want the show to appeal to both comic book people, but also people who know nothing about the comics. We don't really know anything about the comics. These shows were basically our gateway into the whole DC world.
Yeah.
I never cared for superheroes until I started watching these shows.
That's the thing. I pretty much that's the thing. I only knew the basics about certain DC heroes, and I didn't know much of anything about the Flash before watching this, other than just the basic concept.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, this was the introduction to a lot of comic book stuff. I know a lot of people who are comic book fans who watch this, but I know a lot of people who aren't and watch this, and it's so fun watching people who don't really know much about comics. And sometimes I think that's better, because when the show does do different things, some of the people who are comic book fans get really upset when it does different things, whereas I have a fresh perspective and I enjoy it for what it is, and then I'm like, okay, so this is different or this isn't different.
Yeah, we don't really care when it changes, but comic book fans are like, no, it's not supposed to go like that.
But speaking of things, this show loves to... The Flash, as well as a lot of the other DC shows we're going to cover, love to do, like, clever references or shout-outs, or even just what I call stunt casting, because the show itself already has one with Barry's dad, who has already acted as a Flash in a whole different Flash show.
Oh, yeah, the guy playing Barry's dad played the Flash in an older show.
They've done that a few times with characters' parents, but yeah, so already we have stunt casting with Barry's dad. But speaking of Barry's dad and his backstory, obviously we do get some good scenes, especially the ending where he's in jail and Barry talks with him. But, I remember somebody on the audio commentary said, especially in season 1, they like to say that Barry has 3 dads. They say he's got his real dad, his foster dad, and his science dad.
Yeah, definitely at some points in the season, he does start to see Wells as a bit of a father figure.
According to, the writers like to believe that this show, especially this first season, they say it's a show about fathers. And, you can...
Although it's more so with Cisco, because later on, we do start to see that...
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But, speaking of other... I suppose we should touch on most of the cast of characters, since it's the first episode. There's a lot to introduce. That's the thing about talking about a pilot, is it's all introduction. So it's not so much reviewing as an episode, you're reviewing it as a pilot, saying how does it set everything up.
I feel like on one end there's Cisco, who is introduced great and he's interesting, and then on the other end of that spectrum there's Caitlin, who I don't find her all that interesting at first.
Neither do I, but they do hint at some stuff with Caitlin, because obviously there's a bit more going on with her than, say, Cisco. That's the thing, Cisco, we don't know anything. He's just a fun character, whereas Caitlin, you can tell there's something going on with her, which obviously we will learn more about, whereas Cisco, there's no, mystery or backstory or anything to worry about. He's just a fun character for now. Obviously, we'll get more into all the characters, but, a lot of them are just, okay, here's a fun character, or here's this character, but obviously... But since we're touching on characters, like we said, we'll touch on Wells, who... Wells is a very interesting character. He just, it's just...
You never know where to stand with him.
Exactly, he's very interesting, and this show is going to start setting a tradition, because obviously when Barry does start to fight and has a conflict, it begins a tradition of Barry needs an inspirational speech, which normally I don't like, or it becomes boring or cliche, etc. But I think the one character that can always pull this off is Wells.
Yeah, definitely.
I think he's probably the best character who can do these speeches, whereas, when it's certain other characters we'll get into, it just doesn't work as well.
Well, it makes sense that he knows exactly what Barry needs to hear,
Yeah.
but we won't go into detail.
But also it works best because this is still early on, but later on they'll keep doing it when it's later into the show.
Yeah.
But speaking of characters I don't like, we have Iris and we have Eddie. I don't care for Eddie, and I'm never that fond of Iris, to be honest.
Yeah, I hate when people say that they belong together. The show really tries to show us that Iris and Barry belong together, but really, he had better chemistry with Felicity.
Iris, that's the thing. I don't hate Iris, but I don't care for her at all. And I don't just mean in this episode, I mean in general. There's never any moment where I like, oh, this is a good Iris moment, or anything like that.
Yeah.
I've never been that fond of Iris. That's the thing. I understand, you could compare it to Felicity, who's a controversial character, but that's the thing. Sure, she's got a few moments I don't like, but all in all, she's a delightful character most of the time. Whereas Iris is just... she's either there or she's annoying.
Yeah, Felicity and Barry pair so well together.
We'll get to more of that later, but if you've watched but since we're speaking of Arrow, obviously, look, we all know this show connects with Arrow, but it's enjoyable whether you don't watch Arrow or whether you do watch Arrow. But if you do watch Arrow, there's a lot to catch. Obviously, the whole first half of the episode is really Barry telling his origin story to Oliver.
Yeah.
Which, as we saw in a previous Arrow episode, Barry woke up and he called Oliver, and this is what he was speaking about. Barry tells him about what happened, and, Oliver gets to give him a bit of inspirational speech.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, not passing the torch, but, telling him how to be the hero now.
Yeah.
But, speaking of Arrow, I suppose ages ago we said we'd discuss some inconsistencies. I feel like this pilot doesn't quite match up with the timeline we saw in its equivalent version in Arrow.
Yeah, he wasn't on the phone to Felicity.
That's a small one, but also the Arrow version makes it seem like Barry just barely made a train and just barely made it back for the accelerator. Like he went straight to his lab and got killed. Got struck by lightning. But here, it implies, okay, it's still bright and daytime, he's got on a train, made it, done some work stuff, gone to work, got all this stuff, watched the accelerator, went back to the lab, and then got hit by lightning. So,
well, not watched the accelerator, he was going to, but then the guy
yeah, but that's what I mean,
purse.
He still went to the parade, or what, not parade, but you know what I mean, the ceremony. But yeah, there are some inconsistencies, but it's to be forgiven, you have to make more room. But that makes sense when you consider I did say originally they weren't going to give it a full pilot. So they had to take some leniencies. But yeah. But like we were saying, I don't like Iris, and I don't like Eddie. He's a lot like Tommy, where, first off, he's a bland character with nothing special about him, other than causing a love triangle. So yeah, Season 1 of Flash has Eddie, and Season 1 of Arrow has Tommy.
Although comic book fans might recognise something interesting with his last name.
Yeah, but we'll worry about that. But all in all, but speaking of connections to Arrow, another thing is both Star City and Central City both share a prison, being Iron Heights. They share a prison despite the fact that they're apparently 600 miles apart. I don't know why. There are plenty of other prisons in this show and in this universe we'll learn about. But yeah. But that's the thing. But all in all, while I don't care for some bits that are going to be set up, like the Iris stuff, this is still a delightful pilot. It's still a delightful introduction of a superhero. Obviously Arrow's so different, but when you watch this, it reminds you, yes, I am watching a superhero universe.
Yeah.
You just get that feeling, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
But that's the thing. I suppose there's not much to talk about. It's hard to really talk about the plot of the episode because obviously, yes, we had.
I didn't care for the episode's villain because in the end his motives seemed kind of pointless. Like, I found it interesting. There was this part where Joe asks why would God need to rob banks, and then he says, "Yeah, you know what? I'll think bigger." And I was just thinking, well, it was kind of understandable robbing banks because money is useful, but then he just decides to cause destruction, and I'm like, what's your plan here? What's the point of that?
My only theory is that he's going to leverage people and say, right, everybody in Central City give me a crap ton of money or I'll blow the place up. But that's about the only thing I can think of. But yeah, but it's fine. You don't need to have a super engaging villain. It's your first villain. It's a comic book villain. It's supposed to just say, right, we're going to deal with metahumans, because that's the one thing I like about this show is even though it's got metahumans, the first season, or at least the first half of Flash, really sets up the idea that all this is still new to the world. There's never been, every other character is still new to all this crazy stuff. Just like on Arrow, when everything is all new, and anytime there's anything weird, it's a new concept. Metahumans are a new concept to this world. It's not like any other, which means that no other place has superheroes or has anything crazy going on. This is new. There's nothing else happening, which I like the way they set that up.
Yeah.
But all in all, like I said, the villain doesn't have to be engaging. It's just here to say, hey, we've got metahumans, here's your villain. I mean, think about it. The first villain in Arrow was just Adam Hunt. It's more about setting up, okay, it's more just saying, this is the formula, this is what to expect. We're going to face metahumans, Barry's got superpowers, he's going to stop them, you know what to expect.
Yeah, I know.
But I think we've pretty much covered it. It's a lot to talk about, but it's also difficult to talk about because it's a pilot. It's all just setting the stage.
No, I'm still not sure what to rate it. Like, when you think about a pilot, the real questions are, did it do its job of introducing the show?
That's what I was going to say. Normally, when we're reviewing, if an episode is nothing but setup, we say, well, it'll drag it down. But it's the first episode. It is nothing but setup. That's the whole point of it. I suppose the only thing is there is the cliffhanger with Harrison Wells, where he gets up from his wheelchair, which shows there's a lot more to Harrison Wells than we know.
That's one small thing I don't like about season 1 is that I don't like that the good guys know so much less than we do.
I guess sometimes it can be. They
didn't do that as much in Arrow. We sort of mostly knew the same things as the good guys.
Yeah, I guess, but sometimes it's kind of fun to have a mystery. It's kind of fun to...
Yeah, but then it brings about moments like when you want to shout at the screen and be like, you idiots, it's this all along. And
well, at this early on...
They seem so dumb because we know more than that.
Yeah, but at this early on, all it is a mystery. It's just something to give us to be suspicious of. We don't really know anything. All we know is we need to be suspicious of Wells.
Yeah, we just know he's lying about the wheelchair, and he has a newspaper from 2024.
Exactly, and the headline of that newspaper is another nod to comic books and another thing that might get fans excited and say, oh wow, they're going to foreshadow this thing, which we'll get into that thing eventually, a very, very long time from now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's our cliffhanger. But like I said, this, in my mind, don't rate it as a normal episode. Rate it as a pilot. Rate it as what its job is supposed to do. And in that case, I think it does its job very well. I'm giving it an 8.5.
I was just going to say 7.5.
That's fair enough too. It does a lot. There are some dull moments or characters I don't care for, but at the same time, there's a lot. It's just such a delightful, fun show. You can't not love it.
Yeah, it's great.
And the fact is, it's a pilot. When you watched it, you wanted to see more, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
The whole point of a pilot is to say, do you want more? That's literally the point. The pilot, as far as I know, in America, pilots work where they make a pilot separate to the rest of the season, and then it's sort of like to say, okay, are we going to have a full season? And then the network will approve it and stuff like that. Yeah. Which is why, because pilots are often produced before the rest of the season, certain things like way things are written or set designs and so on might not always appear the same.
Yeah, they don't have the proper set.
exactly, like, look at Star Labs and Jitters. Things are not exactly as what you'll be familiar, because pilots are not always the same. For example, Jitters is just a normal coffee shop. It's not a proper built set here. But anyway, enough about that. I think we've talked long enough about this first episode, but I suppose there's a lot to talk about. It is a first episode. It's all setting up.
Yeah.
But that was the first episode of Flash.
Yep.
It's finally fun to be starting other shows and getting more into this.
Yep, it did its job. It was fine.
So, what is the second episode called?
Fastest Man Alive.
Oh, well, that doesn't really tell us
Or
much.
L'uomo più veloce del mondo.
Episodes come with Italian translations. But yeah, obviously. But I suppose we'll be dealing with episode 2 of Flash next time. Next time we will see you for more Flash.
See you next time.